Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Nothing Phone 1 and see how this phone is holding up in 2023. Now, this phone hasn't even been out for a year yet, and it's already kind of made waves. I think I like the Nothing Phone more than I hate it, and I think definitely when it comes down to this device, after looking at what the market has to offer, this definitely would not be the first phone I would recommend buying at all. But I don't think it's a bad phone, and I actually do think that, for the most part, if you're in an area that has a Nothing Phone 1, in my area, it's not really available, like in my country, but so I had to source this one in from a different area. But if it is available in your country, I would say it's not a bad deal. But if you want to pick up some phones, I would recommend this here. The links will be down in the description. You can get that from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the Nothing Phone 1, on the outside of this phone, it is very reminiscent of something like an iPhone on the back and then something like a Pixel 5 on the front. And I think that's a good mix. I don't think that's a bad, mixture at all. I like the design of this phone for the most part. And the front of it has a pretty decent display. It's 6.55 inches. It's an OLED display and it's a full HD panel, so it's 1080p. And I like this screen because it's like blocky, it's flat. Some people like flat displays. I personally like a curved edge a little bit, but you do have that hole punch display in the top left corner. And I think it's a decent display, 120 hertz as well. However, it's definitely not as good of a panel when compared to something like a Galaxy S22 or an S22 Plus or an iPhone 14 Pro or even a standard iPhone 14 Plus. I think those panels definitely look better than something like the Nothing Phone 1. And that's something that I thought to myself when I was kind of, using this phone was that, for what it's worth, you're definitely not getting the best panel, but you have to remember this phone isn't really trying to compete with those devices. But even when you compare this thing against a Pixel 7, which might be more of a competitor, the Pixel 7, I would argue, is the better display for the most part. So that's kind of one other thing to keep in mind. And if we actually kind of take a look at the Pixel 7, that might be one of its biggest competitors and an easier phone to compare it to. It's not really fair to compare this phone against a Galaxy S23 Ultra since they're different price tags, but the Pixel 7 might be a little bit easier to compare to here. Now on the bottom, we do have our USB-C port, which is great. We have a SIM card eject side too, which is pretty cool. And on the back, this was kind of the novelty of this phone, I'm assuming. This was the thing that was kind of stepping this phone away from all the other phones out in the market right now, was its cool little back side to it. So they call it, I think, the glyph interface. And it's basically like these LED lights on the back, which I think is cool. I think having a novelty like this on a phone can make your phone stand out a lot. And I think that's a really cool thing. And a phone in a market where all the phones look alike, having a phone that has this type of LED light thing on the back is very cool. Unfortunately for a lot of people out there, they're probably going to put a case on their phone, and the cases may not support those LED lights. They may not have cutouts for them, depending on who the manufacturer is. So that's kind of a sad thing because you're really going to be covering up one of the main novelties of this phone, but you're still getting a dual camera setup on the back and you still have a pretty good build quality phone. I mean, this thing does not feel like a cheap phone at all. I think it looks pretty good, and definitely if you're using this phone, I'm not going to say it's going to stand in or stand out. I'm going to say it's going to look a little bit more unique than some other phones out in the market. So from that perspective, I would say the body is pretty decent for what you're paying for. Now in the camera department, this is probably one of the worst areas of this phone, and this is, when I look at this phone, this is where things start really going downhill for me. So on the back, you have a dual camera setup, a 50 megapixel wide angle lens, and then a 50 megapixel ultra wide camera. And on the front, you have a 16 megapixel wide angle lens. Now we can do 4K at 30 on the back and 1080p at 30 on the front. Now I'm not too sure what they were thinking here, but phones from 2018 can do 4K at 60 on the back, and phones from 2019 from Apple can do 4K at 60 on the front. So having these resolutions that are missing can really be weird situations for a phone company like this, because if you don't put a solid camera on your device, that's really going to make a lot of people who buy these phones the first time never buy their phone ever again because the cameras just aren't that good. We saw this with Nexus. A lot of people didn't like Nexus phones because of the cameras, and I'm sure a lot of people switched away from Nexus, but then they came back when the Pixels, the cameras started getting a little better. So it's not like the camera here can't be improved, but some things I would love to see is at least 4K at 60 on the front and the back. Even Google took so long after a certain point for their Pixels to upgrade their resolutions, and they just stagnate. I've always seen a correlation from when cameras stagnate on a phone to when the the sales of phones and the market, the hype behind these phones, we even saw with OnePlus, it's just not a good look. Even though I'm not a big camera guy, I like having the ability of using my camera at the highest capacities, and this phone doesn't really have that great of a camera. I've talked about it in my comparisons last year, and as well as I think a review I did of this phone. So this camera definitely would not be one of the reasons I would go and buy this phone for sure. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. Now moving on to the software and longevity portion of this phone, this is going to be one of those areas of this device that is either going to make it or break it. Every single time I see a new phone manufacturer come out, we've seen like the Next Bit Robin phones, if you remember that. I remember the Essential phone. There's a lot of random phones that come out, and there's probably 30 of them that I'm missing, that come and go. And the reason for that is because they drop the phone and they never support that phone. They never drop more updates on that device. And that can hurt a lot of different phones out there. So with a device like the Nothing Phone 1, all I'm really hoping, so far it's stock Android for the most part. There's not really like a crazy amount of skin on it, which is great. But I would love to see the Nothing Phone company to go ahead and continue to support these phones for at least like 3 to 4 years. If they can give a consistent update system every single year for like 3 to 4 years, that would make people probably want to switch over from something like their older phone that's unsupported and maybe give Nothing Phone a chance. I think that would be a really cool thing. And personally, with the software experience of this phone, I think that in and of itself is, it's better than it's not. And I like that a lot. But this phone is so new, we have nothing to compare it to because this phone company hasn't been around that long. So we're about to see how long this phone's going to last. And I'm really hoping it's not like an essential phone type of situation where they drop a phone and then they just don't support it for a while and then it just kind of dies out. I really hope that's not the case because this company could have a lot of potential. Now internally, this phone does have the Snapdragon 7078G Plus chipset inside of it with 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, and it does go up to 12 gigs of RAM. Now I do think with this type of phone, the performance, it's not really trying to compete with like the Galaxy S22 or Galaxy S23. It's supposed to be in its own lineup, like it's not a crazy big deal or anything like that. And I do think that 7 series of chipsets are pretty good. I mean, I had the Pixel 5 that had that 7 series of chipset, and it really wasn't that bad of a performing phone. Like, it was actually pretty decent. The Pixel 4a was almost in the same ballpark as well. So I look at a phone like the Nothing Phone 1, and I think this phone, as long as you're not trying to do anything crazy with it, you should be okay. But there's a lot of people who want a phone that, isn't the most expensive one, and you would probably be getting decent performance from this thing. It's not going to be top tier by any means, but I do think with a phone like the Nothing Phone company, they have a lot of potential of, making the next generation of phone a little bit faster. But I do think this one is not slow. They didn't put some weird, crazy Mali GPU in this thing. And I think that in and of itself is a really good thing. So a lot of devices still support a lot of applications that I use, like a lot of emulators, thrive on the Snapdragon chipsets. So in this case, this phone would probably do a lot for me, in my opinion. So there's not too much to complain about in the performance side. Of course, it's not the 8th gen series of chipsets. I've heard rumors that the next phone is going to have it, but it's totally understandable. This is not supposed to be the most expensive phone, so I think that's totally okay. And battery life wise, it has a 4500 mAh battery, still a very good sized battery I have in this year. And you do have wireless and reverse wireless charging on this device as well, which is actually pretty cool. So to kind of sum up this specific video, I do think a phone like the Nothing Phone 1, it's a decent phone for the price tag, but it wouldn't be the phone I would buy at really any price tag because there's always going to be a phone on the other side that I would rather buy than this thing. So for example, I would rather own a Google Pixel 6 or a Google Pixel 6 Pro over the Nothing Phone 1, and I could probably buy those phones for cheaper than what a brand new Nothing Phone 1 would cost. Same thing with the Pixel 7, and those phones are much easier and cheaper to buy in my country that I'm available in than buying this phone. So I know that's not really a problem for the Nothing Phone 1 that's not available here, but I would say even if they both were, I could probably buy a Pixel 7 at this point cheaper than what the Nothing Phone 1 is, and definitely a Pixel 6 or Pixel 6 Pro. So I think that's kind of how I think about it. Unless the next phone is a big upgrade, I'm really hoping they can keep, if they have a small group of fan base, like fans of this thing, I think they'll keep buying it. But I really hope they don't push the fans away, because then that's how you get a phone like an essential phone, essentially. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.